Since Daniel Ortega was elected president of Nicaragua for the second time in 2007, he has methodically turned the country into one of the most authoritarian places in the world. With Ortega continuing to consolidate power, let's look at what the Freedom and Prosperity Index's data reveals about freedom in Nicaragua. According to our Freedom Index, only Venezuela has experienced a greater decline in freedom levels than Nicaragua since 1995. While Nicaragua's score in the Freedom Index declined marginally between 1995 and 2006, the score has plummeted to well below the global and regional averages since Ortega took office. This decline in overall freedom has been driven by declines in political freedom. While declines in civil liberties, political rights, and legislative powers all began before Ortega took office in 2007, his regime has exacerbated and even accelerated these downward trends. For example, the steep drop in Nicaragua's civil liberties score is largely a reflection of the government violating the human rights of protesters. As is often the case in countries with rapidly declining political freedom, the rule of law has also dipped in Nicaragua. This dip has been powered by increased corruption and diminished judicial independence and effectiveness. The absence of political freedom and the rule of law in Nicaragua threatens to undermine progress on prosperity, which has remained surprisingly resilient even as freedom has been eroded. In the long term, however, our data indicates that enhancing essential freedoms will give the country the best chance at improving societal well-being.
Felix, great to see you. You, like Svetlana, require no introduction, but to walk everyone here through your impressive background, you're widely recognized as one of the leading voices within the Nicaraguan democratic opposition. During the widespread protests against the Daniel Ortega regime in 2018, Felix faced numerous criminal charges and smear campaigns. After announcing his intent to run for president in 2021, he was arbitrarily arrested and sent to a maximum security prison for 21 months, nearly 2 years. He was expelled to the United States in 2023 after having his assets confiscated and his Nicaraguan nationality revoked. Maradiaga currently serves as the president of the Foundation for the Freedom of Nicaragua and has initiated the international campaign EndArbitraryDetention.org to raise awareness about the predicament of political detainees not only in Nicaragua, but across the world. Felix, again, thank you so much for joining. Always a pleasure to see you. Let's start with your personal story. What have you gleaned about President Daniel Ortega's model of authoritarianism from your experience as an opposition leader and vocal critic of his regime? And what does that tell us about how other similar movements should advance their causes globally?
First, let me start by expressing my happiness of that wonderful image of my dear friend Svetlana with her husband. It's something that is deeply personal for me. And I joined her as well, raising awareness about a million political prisoners in 78 countries around the world, including my own Nicaragua, but also in Venezuela, also in Cuba, Zimbabwe, Eritrea, of course, Russia and China, where dictators are using this mechanism of arbitrary detention for political reasons. I would like to say that my story is unique, but it's not. It's painfully common. We are seeing how dictators around the world are using financial repression for political control, confiscation of assets, arbitrary detention, and of course the old methods of torture, persecution, and forced exile. And they are learning from each other. There is a dictator's learning curve, and Ortega, as we will see in this extraordinary report, that I must also recognize the work of the Freedom and Prosperity Center for highlighting the deep, not only statistical correlation, but the human connection between economic freedom, prosperity, and individual human dignity. We see how Ortega, with the support of China, with the support of Russia and Iran, has constructed, as this report highlights, one of the regimes that has lost most freedoms in the last 10 years. And going back to your question, when I saw the rapid erosion of democracy in Nicaragua, I could not continue my life as a private sector entrepreneur working for private equity firms abroad or doing consulting and teaching. I joined the thousands of Nicaraguans, mostly students, small farmers, civil society activists, to be part of this movement. And in 2018, the regime decided to respond to the mobilization of Nicaraguans through extrajudicial killings, as many as 300 killings just in the first 100 days of the protest, including 55 students. And this is only a small number. Now we're seeing about 15% of the Nicaraguan population in exile, 5,700 NGOs shut down, including 26 universities, and of course, massive religious persecution, because after shutting down political parties, closing down human rights organizations, both the Catholic and other Christian churches became the last institutions to speak truth to power. And that's what we see also a religious persecution in Nicaragua, which is only one more expression of a dictatorship.
Thank you, Felix. As we look at data through the Freedom Index and the report this year, we clearly see that political freedom, rule of law have been essentially gutted in the last 15 plus years that Ortega has been in power. In your eyes, at the front lines, what do you think has been his most effective tool for systematically consolidating power?
I think there are many tools, but due to the fact that we have limited time, I'll summarize the mechanisms that Ortega has used. Basically, he kept a substantial control of the judiciary system. It's important to remember that in 1990, the late Violeta Chamorro, what we call in Spanish in Nicaragua, La Dama de la Paz, the first democratically elected president in Nicaragua, Violeta Chamorro, recently passed away, one of my personal heroes. And President Chamorro had to deal through a very complicated transition process. And this is a lesson learned from the rest of the world, that transition processes need to be brave and robust. Not to say that Nicaraguans didn't try, but Ortega kept a part of the judiciary and also of the Nicaraguan army. And then in the year 2000, we must also acknowledge the painful fact that someone by the name Arnoldo Alemán, a president at the time, granted Ortega increased control of the legal system, which allowed the dictator to weaponize the courts against dissidents, against political parties. Number two, the control, as I just said and mentioned, of the military and the police, and also the fact that certain, I cannot generalize, but certain actors of the private sector, certain conglomerates, believed that Ortega, who came with the promises of billions of dollars from Venezuela and from China, they believed that he could be a different political player, allowing parts of the private sector to share the money that Ortega was bringing from China and from Venezuela. And this is an alarm. It's a red flag that when economic freedom and prosperity is not the result of free market, it's not the result of the respect of private property, when it's not the result of the respect of individual human dignity, all these institutional arrangements that allows chronic capitalism, at the end of the day, result in dramatic erosion of human rights. And that's what we saw in Nicaragua, a combination of control of the legal system and legal institutions, a control of the a repressive apparatus, particularly the army and the police, and of course paramilitary groups, and also the collaboration of certain elements of the private sector.
So having articulated all those challenges, when you think about charting a path toward liberal democracy in Nicaragua, where does that path start? And what do you see as the greatest single challenge?
The biggest challenge at this point is the destruction of civil society and the fundamental fabric of society. When you have a society with no journalists, particularly those who were independent, when we have 26 universities that have been shut down, massive numbers of Nicaraguans in exile, and a massive brain drain, the reconstruction of that civic fabric it's important. And one thing that we have learned, not only through Nicaraguan Freedom Foundation another organization, is that even in extreme repressive regimes, and let's look back into the data presented by this extraordinary report, something that has been confirmed by my colleagues, and I say this as a trustee at Freedom House as well. Nicaragua ranks alongside Belarus, Eritrea, Afghanistan as one of the countries in the world in which there's no possibilities of any public protest. However, Nicaraguans are resorting to decentralized resistance, using the very, very limited spaces that they have to organize through non-traditional means. Of course, it's a very sensitive term. I cannot give many examples in order to protect the identity of people in Nicaragua who continue to exercise what we label decentralized resistance. So one path is rebuilding the civic fabric, but the second path is the solidarity of democratically oriented countries and institutions. Freedom fighters, human rights defenders cannot do their work without the solidarity. And I think that Svetlana has shared some ideas for Belarus that apply to Nicaragua, targeted sanctions, and also blocking the regime from the access to certain markets. And particularly, I need to say this, since we have an American audience, I think it's immoral for the Daniel Ortega regime to have access to a free trade agreement with the United States at the same time that he's persecuting Nicaraguans and doesn't allow any economic freedoms inside the country, particularly labor union movements, which is one of the fundamental criteria for a free trade agreement. So I think that in concrete terms, if there's one thing that the international community and the United States in particular can do, is to take actions regarding the free trade agreement and targeted sanctions against Ortega. I will also say, it's very important for me to say this, that transnational repression is a problem, serious problem. 9 Nicaraguans have been targeted in exile. 3 of them have been killed. And more recently, retired Army Major Roberto Samcam was assassinated in Costa Rica. And that's another action that we need to pursue, the protection of the voices in exile.
So 2 clear messages as to what more the international community can do to support Nicaraguans on the front lines. So last question for you, Felix. If we zoom out from Nicaragua to the broader region, when you compare the Ortega regime and what it's doing to other closed autocracies in the region like Cuba, Venezuela, what, if any, similarities do you see? And what value is there in coordinating pro-freedom efforts across the broader region?
There's a lot of value. Dictators collaborate. And our dear friend Anna Applebaum has written this amazing book, Autocracies, Inc., in which she explains that autocrats collaborate agnostically, meaning that they don't care about ideologies. There are trans-ideological alliances. So you see, for example, Putin collaborated with the mullahs, the ayatollahs of Iran, or the ayatollahs of Iran collaborating with the Communist Party of Cuba, or with Daniel Ortega in Nicaragua. However, we do not see the same level of transnational collaboration among democracies. This is something that we're trying to solve at the World Liberty Congress. So that's one very important thing. The trend that I also see in the case of Nicaragua, it's smart repression. They're using a lot of technology, and you see a poor country that cannot deliver technology for education, for infrastructure development. They're using technology to repress dissidents, to do facial recognition of dissidents, to block Nicaraguans to travel freely internationally, and to take our nationality away. So we see a trend of a learning curve of dictators, and also sharing data and information, for example, with other regimes. I was in Ukraine about a year ago, and I was absolutely mind-blown to see some specific examples of this collaboration when I interviewed Ukrainian soldiers and civilians that had been kidnapped in Russia. And they described some of the mechanisms of torture, of repression that were also used in Nicaragua. We're seeing the same trend in Cuba and Venezuela. So regimes are working together, they are sharing information, they are supporting each other, they're teaching each other tactics to evade sanctions, democracies, international civil society, democratically oriented institutions should work together. I'm actually very optimistic. The Atlantic Council is playing a very important role. Organizations such as the World Liberty Congress are playing also an important role, and many, many others. And I'm hopeful. I have hope. I have a faith. I will also keep in my heart the words of Svetlana that said that she saw the fire in the eyes of her husband. And that's the fire I see in political prisoners who are recently released in many parts of the world. And I will end up mentioning the importance of not leaving any political prisoners behind, because that also gives morale and energy to those who are defending freedoms at the front lines.
It's a great note to end on, Felix. Thanks so much. Just like there is this axis of autocracies closely collaborating, it's a really important call to action for democracies globally, let alone in the region, to work even closer together to push back on this repression. With that,
thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Felix. We'll conclude this portion of the program and transition to our featured panel.